rain falls in gray far away. Please, please, baby lemonade.
Hello there, thrill seekers. It's me and Ziggy. Hi, Ziggy. Say hi to the folks. Anyway, here we are. And today I thought I'd do something a little unusual, which is that I'd talk about something that's sort of tangential to what I usually talk about, and that is Syd Barrett. So, just before the beginning of this video, you saw a little snippet of me doing one of his songs called Baby Lemonade. And the reason I want to talk about Syd Barrett is I just finished reading this book. It's big. How many pages does this thing have? 443 pages. Oh my god, that's huge. And it's a biography of Syd Barrett. So I should tell some of you young folks out there in the audience who Syd Barrett was. He was the original leader of the Pink Floyd. They were called the Pink Floyd during the time that he was the leader of the band. And he was a very interesting singer and songwriter and a really interesting guitar player who was very influential to my own sort of trajectory in the world of trying to play music. I don't know where I first heard of Syd Barrett. I probably read about him before I actually heard him because I used to read a lot of stuff about 60s rock and things. But I remember my friend Bill Farrell, who was one of the guitarists in a punk band in Kent, Ohio called the F Models. He had this double album set that had come out in the 70s where they'd reissued Syd Barrett's first two solo albums. He only really did 2 solo albums, although there was a third one that was made up of outtakes and stuff from the first 2. But he had this record, and he said, oh yeah, you like psychedelic, you're going to love this stuff. And he played it for me, and that was it. I was like, that was it for me. There was something so evocative and wonderful and unusual about his songs and his voice and like I say, his guitar playing that was just mind-blowing to me. And it was very influential on what I later did with the Dementia 13 album. Some of you may know that I recorded 5 albums under the name Dementia 13, which was sort of a fake band. The original idea of that was that I was Dementia 13, and that was a pseudonym for me, but then it became a band and blah, blah, blah. And also, I just put up a Dementia 13, a live song by Dementia 13 called Do What You Will on the YouTubes, if you want to go look at that. I don't know what Ziggy's barking at. Maybe Syd Barrett's ghost is there. But the story of Syd Barrett that I initially heard without any sort of details... Ziggy, what you doing? The story I initially heard without any details was Syd went crazy and had to be kicked out of Pink Floyd. He made these solo albums, and yeah, the solo albums have parts in them that just sound like he might be mentally deteriorating right there as the recording's going on. There's a few songs that just sort of meander weirdly, or where you can hear him turning pages. I think he had his lyrics or something up on a music stand, and he stops playing and turns the pages and then carries on, and they just left that in there. There are songs where the tempo wanders in bizarre ways. I've never been the greatest timekeeper in the world as far as that goes, but my God, Syd Barrett was all over the place, speeding up and slowing down and going really weird with the... Ziggy, what is you doing? Let me go see what Ziggy's doing. Yeah, I went back there. I don't know what's Ziggy's getting bugged about, but I'll show you at the end of the video what he was doing. Anyway, so what was I saying? Syd Barrett, went crazy and couldn't play anymore, and he only made those 2 solo albums. Apparently, a third album was attempted with a few sessions in 1974 that came to nothing. I just noticed that Rhino Records, which is over there in Montclair, has a bootleg of the aborted 1974 solo album, and I might go out and get it so I can hear it. But anyway, I became a huge fan of this guy, Syd Barrett. And the Dementia 13 albums, the ones I made, are full of songs that sound like heavily influenced by Syd Barrett.
Well, it's awfully nice of you to say you always will be true.
And so he was real important to me, and I've never read, up until now, any of the many biographies that have been written about him. It's really interesting because getting into the details of what actually happened to him, it kind of makes the sort of standard story of what happened to him sound false. He probably had some sort of mental illness. The book speculates here and there on what it was, but I don't think they ever came to a conclusive diagnosis. But he wasn't ever raving mad. He did have moments where he would just get enraged and burn all his stuff. This is long after he finished being a professional musician. But for the most part, people say he was weird, but a decent fellow, and he could string sentences together. And one even surprising thing I found out is he died in 2006 at age 60, which is my age that I am now, probably from complications of diabetes. But it seems that by the time he reached his 50s, he was actually pretty nice to people. He wasn't very forthcoming to fans who sought him out, but he wasn't mean to them. He'd just be like, "Oh, thanks for the compliment," and then scurry off, and he didn't want to talk to them very much. But he was aware that that people liked what he did, and he was okay with that. But he didn't have any mind to talk about it. But what seems to have happened, more than being kind of schizophrenic and raving mad, which he might have been on some level schizophrenic, I don't know, was a reaction to fame, which I can understand. Once Pink Floyd started to become a little bit famous, he realized that fame was not for him. But I think he was probably conflicted because he did want to be a professional musician, and he did want to get his songs out there, and he did want to do music as a career. But I think he understood that in order to make a career out of music, one had to be famous. And that being famous entailed a lot of things that he didn't want to have anything to do with. And I think in a large measure he escaped into drugs to try to deal with the pressures and weirdness of being famous, and this exacerbated his mental condition, and he just got to the point where he really couldn't function, or maybe he just didn't want to function in that way at all. He just wanted to kind of live a quiet life. And that's eventually what he was able to do. There was enough royalty money coming in from the early Pink Floyd albums, which kept getting reissued and reissued, that he didn't have any need for money. In fact, the story goes that he often just tossed away royalty checks because he had plenty of money already. Not that he was rich, but he had enough to buy his groceries and to pay his bills, and he just didn't want any more. So he just walked away from that. And that I can understand. That I can really understand. I look at my own career and I think, gosh, as I was reading this book, I can think of several junctures in my own career where people were offering me the opportunity to become more famous or to make it bigger. I remember in particular having a conversation with somebody I met at Tassajara the Zen monastery up there in Northern California, who was telling me I need to make my books more prescriptive if I want to sell more copies. And I was like, prescriptive? And she was saying, oh, like a doctor writes a prescription. You tell people what to do. You give them a step-by-step thing to do to accomplish a certain goal. And I thought, this is not what I'm doing at all with this. Is I'm not interested in telling people a step-by-step process in order to reach a goal. And even with this YouTube channel could probably be a lot bigger if I followed people's advice on it. I actually did follow my nephew's advice. My nephew, he's in his 30s now, knows a lot about how to market things on the internet, and he gave me some advice about doing regular videos, doing at least a certain amount every week, and putting thumbnails on them and coming up with catchy titles, and so I do that. But there is a certain point at which being famous becomes screwy. People want things from you that you can't possibly provide, and people project all sorts of things on you, and it just gets weird, and I am not interested in that. And so I've gotten things to the level where I can make a living at it, and that's good enough. That works out okay. And I could probably be more financially secure than I am, but as long as it doesn't tank completely, I'll be okay, which it might at any minute, and then I don't know what I'll do, because I'm too old to even get a job at Starbucks or McDonald's. But I could be one of those greeters at Walmart, so maybe I'll do that once this all goes south. The thing that kind of interested me from the standpoint of what you folks who tune in to this video channel might be interested in is there's a certain sort of spiritual aspect to the Syd Barrett story that I find to be maybe something that if he'd pursued it might have been helpful to him. Because it seems to me that the reason he initially got into taking LSD and doing all these psychedelic experimentations was to try to find, as a lot of people were doing in his time and a lot of people are doing now, was to try to find the deeper meaning of life, and that the promise, especially in the 60s, was there that these drugs were going to help you do that. And of course, it didn't help him do that at all. It just made him. It just exacerbated whatever problems were already going on. But there's a couple of places within the book where his friends are trying to get him into. I can't remember the guy's name. It was some Indian spiritual teacher who I'd never heard of. He had the last name Singh, which would tend to indicate that he was Sikh, at least by birth. But I'd never heard of this guy. And when I tried to find it again, I didn't mark the page, so I can't find the name again. But there was some attempt by some friends of his to try to get him to get into something like that, as a way to deepen his interest in the meaning of life, the universe, and everything, and in a way that didn't involve taking drugs and stuff. But he just wasn't. By then, I think the drugs had done too much damage, and he wasn't interested. This also kind of brings up a point I've brought up a few times, and I always get attacked for this by people, which is the drug method, the method of trying to find spiritual answers through drugs is just is dangerous and not a good path, and can just a lot of people do okay with it, but you never know you never know if you're one of the people who's going to do okay with it. And when you start putting these chemicals into your system, the chemicals take over and do what they want, and you're kind of helpless until whenever the chemical comes out of your system. And they mention something in this book about the come down from LSD, which was one of several reasons that I stopped taking it. I took it 4 times, but there was a huge, always at the end of every trip, there was a huge surge of deep depression that I'm like, I don't want to deal with that deep depression that comes up after every trip anymore. That was another reason, and that's something else that they bring up. So sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Syd Barrett, instead of keeping on doing more drugs and becoming more withdrawn and going that route, had maybe gone to this Swami. I don't know if he was a good one or a bad one or not, but let's hope that he was probably one of the good ones, and pursued those teachings. He might have been able to come back and figure out a way to do his music on a low key level and not have to deal with being super famous anymore, and do it that way. The other thing that is interesting about this book is there's a story that everybody who follows Pink Floyd or Syd Barrett has heard, and if you haven't, well, I'll tell it to you. Pink Floyd made an album in 1975, I believe, called Wish You Were Here. And it is Roger Waters, who became kind of the leader of Pink Floyd after Syd left, writing his lament about what happened to Syd Barrett. And the story that I've heard many, many times is that Syd Barrett showed up during the recording, or maybe during the mixing of that song. Shine on You Crazy Diamond is the song from the album Wish You Were Here. And Shine on You Crazy Diamond is all about Syd Barrett. And he showed up during the mixing of that song, and he was fat and bald and crazy, and they didn't want to deal with him. Well, turns out that's only part of the story. Apparently, he didn't just show up once and then leave. He apparently was in the studio for several days, like at least 3 days, depending on who you ask, because there's several interviews reproduced in the book. It was 3 or 5 days that he was in the studio, and he said, well, I can play some guitar on this song. And they're like, oh, Syd, we already finished the guitars. What a bunch of jerks! What a bunch of jerks Pink Floyd were, because I would have been like, yeah, go ahead, have a try. It doesn't hurt if the guitar playing that Syd Barrett tried out, if you put a guitar on him and say, here's the track, and let him play, if it turned out to be no good, you just don't use it. But by every account, his guitar playing, while it got erratic, he never lost it completely. So he would have turned in a better solo than David Gilmour did, but they didn't let him. They didn't give him even the chance. Like, what a bunch of jerks. So I get the impression that maybe the rest of Pink Floyd were just as much of a problem as Syd, and I think Nick Mason even says, the drummer from Pink Floyd even has said that sometimes, that maybe they were the problem and not Syd. Anyway, I would recommend this book if you're into Syd Barrett and that stuff. It's long and it's really detailed, and that's probably the main fault I would put into this book, is that it's way too detailed. There's stuff in there you're like, oh, come on, I don't need to know all of that detail. Also, it's pretty obvious that the author, Julian Palacios, I think that's how you pronounce that, Palacios, is not a musician himself, but is reading stuff written by musicians and kind of getting it wrong, which annoys the heck out of me. There's a point where he refers to Jerry Shirley, who's a drummer, as a bass player several times, not just once. And there's a point where he talks about Jimi Hendrix playing a flying arrow guitar, which any guitar player knows is a flying V guitar. Looks kind of like a flying arrow, but that's not the name of it. And anybody who's played guitar would know it's a flying V. Anyway, little quibbles like that, but I think overall it's a pretty good book. And I don't know if that was an interesting video. You tell me. Tomorrow or sometime whenever I get around to doing another video this week, I'll try to get back to more strictly Buddhist-y topics, but I just thought I'd share that with you about Syd Barrett and what I thought of the book. Anyway, if you want to contribute to me buying more books about Syd Barrett, I might try one of the other biographies. He actually recommends the book called A Very Irregular Head, so I might look at that to see what that's like. If you want to contribute to me buying a copy of A Very Irregular Head, you can go to the URL that you're seeing here on the screen below, which is hardcorezen.info/donate. That is hardcorezen.info/donate. Your money probably won't go to buying me the book. It'll probably be going to buying me groceries and paying for Ziggy's food and other stuff. He's on a special diet right now because he was getting tubby. And I really appreciate your support, but as always, you don't got to support me if you don't want to support me. We will see you next time. Have a good time all the time. Bye. Ziggy, what are you seeing? What's out there that's so weird? That rock? Is the rock what you're seeing that you're barking at? Okay, there's something about these rocks that Ziggy is apparently suspicious of. Not sure what's going on in there. I really think something important is going on. Ziggy, what are you seeing? What are you smelling? You don't know?